So we're speaking with Michelle Moller, and you're the Vice President of Big Data and Analytics. And you also worked on the IBM strategy. Can you explain what this whole topic is about?
So big data is a big buzzword these days, but people shouldn't be thinking about it as something fundamentally new. It really is a word that's being used to describe a full spectrum of data. So it's data at volume, it's data that's of different varieties, so data that's structured and unstructured, data that could come from a camera, data that could come from an RFID tag, so all types of data. It's data at velocity, so data that's coming into organizations with speed, and it's data of different veracity, so data that could potentially be uncertain. So all of that is being described as big data. So it's virtually all data. So now, often we just say all data instead of big data.
Okay.
But I think that helps people feel less intimidated by it because big data sounds new and intimidating. And there are elements that are new. The ability to manage some of what I just talked about, massive amounts of data, that's a relatively new ability for most organizations. The ability to understand data in motion, that's new. But the term now refers to everything in the data spectrum.
So we sometimes refer to some of the data as write-only memory. So you write log files, but you never look at them. So you have data that is underutilized. Is that an area where this big data analytics goes in?
It really covers all usage of data. So people now are looking at log files to understand usage patterns. People are looking at IT data that before was never looked at, capturing system data and understanding their uptime and downtime of their systems, understanding who's accessing what systems when so they can optimize the performance. So all kinds of data that was formerly just sitting there unused, either because people didn't think to use it or because the technology didn't exist to process it at the volume it was being collected at. That's now possible. So things that people used to audit before, think expense accounts where people had maybe in some large companies hundreds of thousands of employees submitting all kinds of expense accounts, subject to fraud, of course. And in the past, most people would have audited a sample of it. Now, with the technologies that are available, they can look at every single one and find patterns of abuse and fraud and identify those. So that's how big data and analytics is changing the landscape of how people work and what they think is valuable in their data.
So it's an asset for a company that's underused. Some companies use it and which are successful with it, and others just have the data sitting there. How do you get from being just a hoarder of data to a user of data?
It really comes down to leadership's view of the value of data. And there are companies now that every single person in the company is thinking, what data do I have to make this person, this process, this whole area of the business better, smarter, faster? Right? And those are the companies that are truly getting advantage from their data. And they're really pulling ahead. Our data shows from our surveys that those companies are actually performing better than companies that aren't using their data.
So it's not just like a data warehouse where you do business intelligence, but you try to support day-to-day operations with better decisions and so forth.
Absolutely. It's getting embedded right into the business processes. Claims, call centers, police cars. Everybody's using data now to make their part of the business better.
Many people find this kind of scary because they feel that companies or governments or the NSA or whoever knows too much about them.
Yeah.
That's basically a big data approach as well that they're using there.
Well, there's always the dark side to every technology, but people shouldn't fear it because there are lots of ways to protect data. So IBM helps organizations to protect the privacy of their data and to protect the security of their data, to prevent people from breaking in and getting data, to prevent inadvertently releasing people's private information that's stored with their company. So that's one thing we're very committed to, is helping people manage the privacy and security of their data. That said, there's lots of data available in the social media sphere, but people have to implement things with a view to what is valuable and what level of privacy do people want to be able to deliver to their customers. And they can anonymize data and deliver value back to customers. So, for example, organizations are taking information that they're gathering from their customers, they're aggregating it, and they're delivering it back to other customers to say, well, here's what's going on based on all of this data that we've accumulated amongst all of you. But nobody can go down and identify any one customer's piece of data. So the anonymization of data is a key element here as well. So I don't think it's not something people should be aware of their own data privacy, but people shouldn't fear big data because of these data privacy issues that have popped up in the marketplace.
Much of the big data analysis is done on the cloud because the data already is there. Yeah. And you basically take the solution to the data because the data is so heavy that you can't really move it. Is there any backlash, second thoughts or whatever on storing data in the cloud now that we have seen so much data popping up?
We are seeing more acceptance of it than ever before, in fact. So we're seeing a movement towards people being okay with it, whereas a few years ago people were very hesitant to store data on the cloud because the technology to secure it has gotten a lot better, but also because people have gotten just more comfortable with that idea of storing data on the cloud. So now a lot of our customers have hybrid solutions where they'll have some of the data on the cloud, some of it on premise, and they're comfortable with both. Often it comes down to less about security and more about just technological viability of moving data up and down to the cloud. But security is there and is possible, and companies are getting more confident in that assertion as they see these technologies in action.
So how do people who are not using the data right now start by assessing their ability to use analytics on their data? Right. So how do you get started?
Well, we have an actual assessment capability. We call it the AQ assessment, and AQ stands for Analytics Quotient. It's like IQ or EQ. Helps people to understand their analytic ability versus their analytic potential. Standard equation. And it's a series of questions that we ask through an online assessment tool that help us to position that customer in terms of their maturity. So it's a maturity model, and the questions are very straightforward to answer, but tell an awful lot about a company's maturity. And it's 4 stages of maturity. The first stage being where they have very little infrastructure in place for their data. They're mostly using spreadsheets. They have no governance of the data. It's very ad hoc. Through to the highest level of maturity where they're taking an enterprise approach. They have a 360-degree view of their customers, of their products, of their employees. They are analytically orchestrated, if you will, so that each department can be coordinated and they can see the metrics that cross different functions. So truly analytic utopia over here, but most companies are actually in the second category.
Okay. So if the customer analyzes itself, it's probably not going to end up with the same results depending on who you ask within the company. Is that true?
That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true, which is part of what we encourage clients to do, is have multiple people do the assessment so you can find the reality is somewhere between the two. The IT department generally overestimates their level of maturity, because they are doing things that are not necessarily being adopted by the line of business, but they're still doing them. So from their perspective, they are actually providing this ability, but from the business's perspective, they're not necessarily seeing the value in the results. So that comes across loud and clear in the assessment.
So does that mean that the business wants better results, so they feel that they're not getting enough yet? So is business the driver for big data?
Right now, absolutely 100% difference in who's driving these initiatives. A few years ago, IT was still very much driving and pushing the organization towards big data and analytics. And there were definitely pockets in the line of business where adoption was being pushed, but now the line of business is really driving a lot of these initiatives, saying, hey, can we monetize our data and create a whole new profit stream, which some companies are doing very effectively. And they're also saying, well, we need to reduce churn. How can you help me reduce churn? I need to implement analytics in this area, in that area. So line of business is very much in the driver's seat these days.
Thank you very much for talking to us, Michelle.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.